Uh, the basic uh, objective of this webinar is to deliberate on the issues of revival and reconstruction, which I think our rural areas are confronting upon, because with a population of 1.35 billion Indian population, about two-thirds are in rural areas, and they are dealing with the economic distress, including agrarian crisis, severe job losses, rising unemployment, increasing migration, which have been much. These problems have been existing in the rural areas even much before this pandemic. The pandemic and the consequent severe economic crisis arising with the lockdown has resulted in fourfold increase in unemployment. About 122 million job losses are being told to us, particularly in the informal sector. Over 60% of the rural households are at the verge of income losses and subsequent rise in vulnerability. Reverse migration of millions of migrants back to their villages has again added to the vulnerability of rural households with sudden loss in their incomes. Much has been discussed in the mainstream media on the pandemic-induced economic crisis and policy responses of central and state governments. Most of the concerns relate to the revival of economic activities with strong industry and urban-centric focus. Rural areas are in the news only due to reverse migration. Agriculture sector is being seen as an oasis in the vast desert of economic crisis, as it witnessed reasonably satisfactory growth in the production. But the fact that this sector has also suffered with significant losses in the sale of fruits, vegetables, flowers, and other perishables, and poor procurement of cereals and pulses. This has attracted less than desired attention. As we are aware, agriculture and allied activities only contribute to one-fourth of the rural household income, and yet engage about 60% of rural workforce. We should not forget that over the years, rural areas are increasingly depending on non-farm activities as a source of employment and income. But lack of employment opportunities in rural areas has accelerated a push migration in recent years, who are largely circular and short-term migrants to the cities. The economic fallout of lockdown, although is widespread, few sections of the society, including small traders, self-employed, migrant workers, daily wage laborers, are worst affected. Millions of migrant workers have returned to their respective rural destinations, which would further accentuate rural economic distress. Even with the partial lifting of lockdown, it is unlikely to see quick return of migrant workers to urban locales in recent months. In coming months, this would create pressure on already crowded rural labor markets and likely downturn of wages and income. To overcome such situation, employment and income opportunities need to be created on a large scale, both in rural and urban areas. In response to this crisis, Government of India has initiated several measures, including food security, cash transfers to farmers and poor households, and fiscal stimulus recently of 20 lakh crore rupees. So this economic package is announced by the Honorable Prime Minister, and subsequent details were given by Honorable Finance Minister. It is crucial for economic revival of the country and of rural areas also. So it is in this context, the webinar aims to deliberate on the issues relating to the revival and reconstruction of rural livelihoods, and seeks answer on various dimensions of the theme of the webinar. To discuss the issues, as I mentioned, we are having a distinguished panel, and I have a great honor of introducing to all of them, briefly introducing, because they are renowned persons, but I take this opportunity to briefly introduce all of them. We have with us Professor Abhijit Sen, who is a former professor of economics, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He was a former member of Planning Commission and chairman of a member of official various commissions, including the High Level Committee on Long-Term Grain Policy, Commission for Agricultural Cost and Prices, the 10th Plan Subgroup on Agricultural Economics and Rural Development. Professor Sen has been advisor consultant with many international commissions, including UNDP, ILO, FAO, OECD Development Center, and UN University, World Institute of Development, and many more organizations, including ADB, IFAD, etc. Now, we are having with us, next speaker is Dr. S.M. Vijayanan. He is a 1981 batch IS officer. Dr. Vijayanan passed his master's degree in English with first rank from University of Kerala and cleared his civil services examination, securing 7th rank. During his 11 years as a secretary, local self-government, Dr. Vijayanand played a key role in the devolution of funds, powers, and personnel to the local government institutions. Besides serving as a member secretary of the same committee on democratic decentralization, he served as a member of the 2nd and 4th Finance Commissions of Kerala and the 3rd Administrative Reforms Panel of the state. He was former secretary to the Ministry of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj. Today we have with us Mr. Nikhil Dey. He is a well-known, please don't go by the labels which you are seeing on the computer. So Nikhil Dey, sir, please do that. Nikhil Dey is a well-known Indian social activist. He works for the Mazdoor Kisan Shakti Sangathan, Suchna Evam Rozgar Adhikar Abhiyan, and National Campaign for People's Rights to Information. He has been actively working for Right to Information, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, Lokpal Bill, and Right to Food, and various human rights organizations. We have with us Professor D.N. Reddy. Again, I think he is Professor Reddy. D.N. Reddy. Yeah, yes. He is again being seen as a RP Mongat. Everybody knows the Professor D.N. Reddy. He is the former Professor of Economics at the University of Hyderabad and the Sankar, late S.R. Sankaran Chair Professor at the National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj. Presently, he is an ISR National Fellow, Council for Social Development, Hyderabad. He was also a member of the Board of Governors of ISAC and Institute for Human Development. His areas of specialization include labor economics, agrarian studies, land reforms, and political economy of development. He supervised a large number of students for their MPhil and PhD thesis. He has made significant contributions in the areas of his academic interest. We have with us today Dr. W.R. Reddy. He is a senior IAS officer and is presently a Director General of National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, with a distinguished academic career from a prestigious Indian Agriculture Research Institute, New Delhi. Dr. Reddy joined the Indian Civil Services in 1986. He has a vast experience of serving several government departments. He has made significant contribution to rural development and local self-governance with great passion. He is well known for transforming National Plant Protection Institute, Hyderabad, into an autonomous National Institute of Plant Health Management and rebuilding the research, training, and outreach capabilities of National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, which he is heading now. He laid a strong foundation for of the institution for continuing to the activities of the institute with some more out-of-box, transformative, and innovative interventions, taking the institute into new orbit of excellence. With these words, I invite. I know, and this webinar is being jointly organized by the Indian Society of Labor Economics and S.R. Sankaran Chair of Rural Labor at National Institute of Rural Development and Panchayati Raj, and Center for Entrepreneurial Development and Financial Inclusion, Professor Dr. Sahu is there, and ISLE. So with this brief introduction, I will request Dr. W.R. Reddy, DG of NIDPR, to give his welcome address and introductory remarks. Dr. Reddy, sir.
Okay, may I come in just before Dr. Reddy comes in? This is to thank all the participants who have joined in. This is just an information. The chat window is on, definitely, but the Q&A window is also on for all the participants. I would request all the participants to please place their questions only through the Q&A window to all the panelists, which will then facilitate the moderators to moderate this session in a better manner. Thank you very much. Yes, over to you, Dr. Reddy.
Thank you, Professor Rajendra Mamgain. Good morning to all of you, Professor Abhijit Sen, Mr. Nikhil Dey, Dr. D.N. Reddy, Jayanand sir, and all the participants. It's a great pleasure to see all of you. Of course, Abhijit Sen sir, I was in the Ministry of Agriculture, so we used to go and trouble him very frequently while he was member in the Planning Commission on terminal markets, APMC reforms, and so on and so forth, a large number of areas. Of course, Mr. Nikhil, we had been in touch with Nikhil on various grounds. Of course, Mr. D.N. Reddy and Mr. Vijayanand are always there with us with NIRDPR. Thank you very much for your presence. I will I'll just list out 5, 6 issues which I think the panelists may like to cover these issues. I'm not getting into the background and other aspects of this whole seminar. The livelihoods are important area now, which we had been discussing. We had been working out. We have communicated some papers to the ministry for their consideration and so on and so forth. Effort is going on, but out of them, I wanted to flag some important areas. Of course, with the reverse migration, all the guest workers going back to their home, there is a group of thinking, a perception that why not we think of the Gram Swaraj as Mahatma Gandhi has envisaged, so nobody need to leave the villages. In that context, agriculture being the main sector on which 60% of the people are dependent, and these people will go and again add to that number. Of course, of late, maybe last decade or so, the non-farm wages, the contribution of a family income from non-farm wages is going up substantially. But that is again mostly from the construction activity. Now construction activities also has come to ceased for the time being, and how much time it will take to revive. So with the 60% plus more people adding on, depending on agriculture, of course, its contribution to GDP hardly 14-15%. Can the sector manage this many hands? So obviously not. We had been talking in different fora that they cannot completely depend on agriculture. So large number of areas have to be opened up. Maybe agriculture and allied sectors, total supply chain management at the village level, and so on and so forth. So the issue is how much agriculture sector can manage, can provide whatever the livelihoods which we are talking about, the satisfactory livelihoods which we are talking about, to what extent it can provide. And the second area is, of course, crop intensification, irrigation is expanding, and the natural resources in terms of water use efficiency parameters in certain areas, groundwater is getting depleted. In certain areas, a huge quantity of water is being pumped and then brought to the various lands like Telangana. Godavari water is being lifted. What all the environmental impact of that and all is a major issue. So crop intensification, water use efficiency, how should we go about in that front, so that we can add some more hands can sustain on the agriculture. Third area which I want to flag is the skilling. Of course, of late, a lot of activity on skilling, but skilling maybe through DDGKY or Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Yojana, all these schemes, they are mostly in the service sector, and again based at urban centers, maybe towns and the big cosmopolitan areas. Whether that type of skilling is going to sustain, mostly wage employment again, not much of entrepreneurship. Is there a need for, again, rethinking on the full-fledged vocationalization of the skilling, right from schooling onwards? Should we redraw our map on the education, especially the middle and the higher level education, moving to vocationalization, as some countries have successfully done, like Germany and so on and so forth. Fourth issue which I want to flag is, of course, Gram Panchayat as a platform, making a holistic plan. Mr. Vijayanand would definitely be adding a lot of ideas into this, taking the resource base into account of that local resource base, and weaving all these interventions, whatever the governments are announcing through the package, revival, financial, loan, credit, and so on and so forth. How can we weave these interventions into the Gram Panchayat plan and into the governance system of Gram Panchayat? That is another area I think which need to be touched. And another important aspect is, with the present level of governance, the effectiveness of governance at various levels. You take state level, the district level, the block level, panchayat level. With this level of governance, can we really move forward at a faster pace, which is the requirement of the day. So what type of governance changes we need to bring, and then how can you bring those changes? That is another area which I want to flag to the panelists. And the last point which I want to flag and mention is, I think there is a need for a versatile approach and a lot of freedom to bring out the creative thinking and experiment by identified agencies or individuals or CSOs or government agencies. In the existing system, there is a lot of watertight compartmentalization in terms of rules, processes, that is basically flowing because of the distrust. Should we relook at that and start trusting the various stakeholders, players, and then allow that creative thinking to come up so that the creative thinking can really take care of the local resources, local needs, local problems, and weave various economic activities into the system. So I want to flag these issues, which I think some of the panelists can cover, would be covering definitely. And then maybe at the end, I would like to come back with some more inputs. So thank you very much once again for your time. And over to you, Mr. Rajendra Mamgain.
Sir, thank you very much for your very brilliant opening remarks. May I now invite Professor Abhijit Sen. Professor Sen, I think Dr. Reddy has already mentioned some issues, and I think there are certain issues which I think you would also like to specifically focus upon. These are the question that what are the policy paradigms, including the latest economic stimulus, to address the agrarian distress and challenges of employment and livelihoods in rural India? What needs to be done to revive and reconstruct the rural economy? Sir, please, I think this is now. I invite you to deliver your address.
Okay, thanks, Mamgain. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Between you and Dr. Reddy, you actually said it, most of the issues. Let me just concentrate on the present policy stance, just as you suggested, and highlight where corrections are necessary in some sense. Now we know, and I think both you and Dr. Reddy pointed out, that as far as rural India is concerned, agriculture still remains the largest sector, but it is now only about 40% of rural incomes, and 60% now comes from non-agriculture. So non-agriculture itself within rural incomes is a very large and significant part. Second, that agriculture has been in distress, and more recently construction has also been in distress, and construction is the main source of non-agricultural incomes. So those predate COVID, and COVID has of course added to the entire problems. Now, luckily so far, both COVID as a disease, as well as the impact of COVID on the economy, have been less marked in rural areas than in urban areas. The incidence of, to the extent that the cases of COVID are reported, are predominantly urban still, and the huge cuts that have taken place in production in manufacturing, for example, or urban services, for example, are certainly not matched in agriculture. However, rural incomes, which were in any case under stress even before COVID, have gone down for two reasons. Reason number one is a further fall in agricultural prices because demand, especially from the urban sector and the hospitality industry in particular, has actually been very, very significant. And the second is obviously in terms of urban incomes and its remittances onto the rural economy. And my estimate of that is that makes up at least 10% of rural incomes. That in the last 2 months has more or less vanished. From this point onwards, my fear is that things are going to look worse than they have been in the last 2 months. And the main reason for that is that with the return of migrants, we might expect at least a short-term spike in the amount of COVID cases, and therefore all the problems on the medical and social side involved directly with the spread of the disease. But more importantly, I think you will see that incomes associated with the urban economy will not only continue to be low, even if the urban economy revives to some extent, there will be a great dependence of the existing rural incomes and resources. There will be this additional population which will make a demand on it. So that's the situation from where I think the planning in the future and policies in the future need to be thought of. In this, we should also be, I think, fairly clear about where we have gone wrong in the past. And I think where we have gone wrong can be summarized in about 3 points. One, we, in the beginning at least, we were over-centralized about it. Second, connected with it, we've had too many knee-jerk reactions. Shut everything down, then when the pressure comes, open something up. And the third is that discussions and planning has really followed announcements rather than being the basis for announcements. So that what we have seen is statements of intent followed by an application of thinking about the best way of going about it. Now, clearly that must change if there has to be any significant planning or improvement in the way we go about things in the future. Now, one very important aspect of this is the issue of dealing with over-centralization. Now, Vijay Anand, who will be coming shortly after me, will talk to you about the huge importance I see of the panchayat institutions in that respect. But of course, decentralization involves even more than that. There's the states in between the center and the panchayats, but there are other institutions as well. I'm not going to go into that, but except to say that so far we've seen very little of decentralization. For example, this 20 lakh crore announcement could have come with a clear recognition that most of the work, most of the expenditures were being borne at levels of state and below. And that state and below should have been where the money should have been put in and decisions made on what they do about it. Yes, the center can have guidelines, but the design and the particular impetus should really come from those levels. I'll leave this general area of decentralization to Vijay Anand, but this is hugely important, and I think it's probably the most important part of what I say, because the rest of what I say depends upon relative good governance, which will depend upon efficient decentralization. Now, what Dr. Reddy said a little while ago was very important. He said, as far as the rural economy is concerned, and I paraphrase him, on the agricultural side, you need efficiency, both in improved marketing as well as improved use of natural resources. And clearly, some of that is addressed in the set of things that the FM released. Yes, there is a little bit more money for NREGA, and there was a lot of talk about agriculture, having central laws, opening up markets. Unfortunately, some of this suffers from too much centralization. For example, announcing 40,000 crores more for NREGA is less useful than to say that NREGA demand is going to increase. We are going to follow the act in ensuring that whatever is required will be provided, rather than fix a ceiling of 40,000 crores. And in fact, to recognize that the demand will actually increase much more than most people think, and allow for the fact that with migrants coming in from elsewhere, households might require more than 100 days of employment. I think an approach to the NREGA on those lines, that is relaxation of the 100-day limit and a commitment to the open-ended financing of it, would have been far more useful than to announce another 40,000 crores. That 40,000 crores doesn't amount to much anyway. The open-ended thing would have then allowed the lower levels of government to decide on how to spend, or how to ensure social distancing in NREGA, as well as to pick up the sort of schemes within NREGA which would serve those efficiency purposes. A similar thing goes for the whole marketing side of it. Much of that is, 15 years old at least. How we proceed will depend really on the way states sort themselves out. And we know that no amount of enams will work if trucks can't get across nakas. And much of what happens at the nakas have really very little to do with laws about agricultural marketing. And I think one of the problems of governance has been that, especially after COVID, we have increased the importance of policing over doing anything else, whether it be the importance of health personnel or the importance of trade. And policing is basically saying nana rather than helping on things. And I think, unfortunately, that has happened. And the sooner I think the Home Ministry gets out of the development side, it would be a good thing. Having said that, in looking for what might happen and what might be the course to go, but I'm very careful to say that what course to go should be allowed at the decentralized level, the states first, and then the lower levels. The following are important. One good thing which might well happen is there will be skills coming back to rural areas from urban areas. Those skills should be fully utilized. Similarly, in some cases, there will be an incentive for some people who would have otherwise got businesses in urban areas to relocate little bits at least to urban areas. However small these impacts are, they should be encouraged. However, having said all that, there is a need for a fairly massive direct demand stimulus on the rural sector immediately and well before any further and any very large increase in the disease incidence escalates. Luckily, disease incidence is very low in rural areas. So an immediate increase in demand will lead to immediate increase in jobs. And I think what we have done in the last 10 days or so should continue. Follow up, try and have an economic boost, and then back it up with the containment of the disease, rather than the other way around, which was what happened between the 25th of March and the beginning of May. Otherwise, it will be again knee-jerk. And in that context, I would say that it is very, very important to talk in terms not of loans. The MSME package was a useful package, but it was all loans. It is important to talk of a fiscal commitment. And the sort of fiscal commitment I'm looking at is significantly more than what has been committed so far. It should be at least 2 lakh crores for rural areas. And the way it is done should not be that the center lays out what is to be spent, but in a direct decentralization to the states, forcing states also to decentralize it to the panchayats. And finally, because I think my time is running out, I would say that when it comes to the future of rural development, we have in rural development, unlike in agriculture, so far a fairly good relationship between the center and the states. It's the center which does most of the spending, states do most of the work, and yet the states have managed to actually, in many cases, do excellent work, some not so well. And the central schemes and the way in which the states have modified and built upon them have a lot which people can learn from. Many of them continue to be of use even now and should be completely picked up. And in that context, I would simply want to add one thing, and I think that's important in the COVID context, which is rural development departments across states have been rather cut off from the health and family welfare and women's welfare departments. There is a connection in some states, but most states, these are watertight separation. Now, the importance of that care sector and the importance of the health sector to any effective stimulus in rural areas at this point cannot be overemphasized at all. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your learned observations. And may I now invite Dr. S.M. Vijayanand-ji to speak his thoughts on the issues which you are deliberating upon. Dr. Vijayanand, sir.
Thank you, Professor. That one correction, though I would like to have been a doctor, I am not yet a doctor. So sometimes I tend to speak like
more than doctor, sir.
sometimes I tend to speak like a doctor. Now, I'll focus on decentralization, but let me start with that. Even in a state like Kerala, there's a huge feeling of uncertainty and fear. We don't know what's happened. Your personal well-being, social issues emerging, and economic issues have been well spoken about. So the first approach, even for livelihood, even for economy, is to reduce the uncertainty and focus on survival to start with. Maybe 6 months, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, but survival is in everybody's mind. Physical survival, and then getting into some economic survival. So this requires assurance, which I find remarkable. I'm not praising Kerala, but I find remarkable. Yes, we are with you. That assurance has to be communicated with credibility and clarity. Any section, we are with you. And a feeling for the local people that help is close at hand, that there is an outreach, I can approach, somebody will respond. This is the thing to be structured, and very interesting. I was really surprised, pleasantly surprised. We had a webinar 2-3 days back, organized with all the states in the country on role of local governments, even in states where local governments are extremely, not disempowered, extremely weak. And we found that all over India, there is a new governance coalition emerging, willy-nilly, not because anybody wanted it to emerge. The local governments, the SHGs, and wherever civil society organizations are there, some kind of coalition is emerging. That is a very bright thing in this dark days. And then once you do this and do this some stabilization, of course, you have to look at the health. And health is not COVID. India is prone to so many kinds of sicknesses, dengue and TB and all kinds of things, malaria, all this come, this is a season. So we can't forget that. And food, I'm not saying agriculture, food. Fortunately, persons like Professor Sen have pointed out that India has a surplus now, and this year's agriculture, in spite of all this COVID downturn, is likely to be satisfactory, and weather may also be good. So food is more important now, and a kind of social security. And social security means something in kind and something in cash. What we realize here is a moral kind of support, which is very, very critical. We are with you, not just slogans from the top at the cutting edge level. Somebody communicates and acts. That is very, very important. And then till incomes come, cash comes first, then probably incomes from agriculture and jobs. That could be the sequence. And India has been giving a lot of entitlements, particularly in the last 20 years. So this is the time when government is also feels that entitlements should be given. There was a shutdown after the initial phase in most of the things. But now government says, yes, give ration cards to those who don't have, give pensions to those who deserve, don't have. So this opportunity may not last, and we use to get whatever is a guaranteed entitlements. Then something which has not been discussed, even I realized it, though I sit in Kerala and hear day in and day about the Kudumbashree and talk about Kudumbashree, the SHGs are run down even in Kerala. No thrift and credit, no loans, no activity, no Narega. So even the SHGs, though they are in the forefront of the COVID fight, they are run down economically. So infusion of cash into SHGs has not been part of the package. And SHG return is around 95% all over India, not in developed states. Even in the backward states, the repayment rate is more than 97%. So infusing cash into SHGs is a local economic stimulus, is a stimulus for health, is a stimulus for money going to the vulnerable within the families. So it has got a myriad kind of this thing, because SHGs spend their money wisely. And then we're talking about local governance. This is the time Professor Abhijit Sen rightly pointed out. It's not additional cash allocation, a guarantee, a word of honor that whatever be your demand for work will be met during this year, or at least they say till December, which means people will come, they know they're going to get wages, migrants will come, And MGNREG is cash. Yes, so many studies. They can have a small local economic stimulus. That is a stimulus which India needs, spread all over 2.5 lakh panchayats or 6 lakh villages. And then that is the beauty of Narega. It can be the starter for agriculture and natural resource management, which are required, so that we ensure that nobody is left behind. And there are a lot of well-done experiments which can be replicated many of them during the NDA government, what they call Kam Mango Abhiyan in Jharkhand. Everybody is enrolled who wants a job. And then intensive participatory planning, so that labor budget comes more genuine, more according to local needs, including agriculture needs. Of course, that is later. Just start with the work, give work, let people start working. Then you go about refining the kind of work which they can do, a kind of a new labor budget emerging, which is more like a plan. Now coming to the panchayat, as I told you, willy-nilly they are leading a new governance coalition at the local level. So let's try to formalize it. I've been terming this as a virtuous circle. Panchayats are interested in something, they are performing, the trust in them by the government and the people increases, probably they can take on new tasks. And there is something called Gram Panchayat Development Plan. If Finance Commission retains the first year's kind of allocation for panchayats, then, and Narega goes according to the current trend, it will be minimum to 6 to 7 lakh crore in the hands of the Gram Panchayats over the next 5 years. And it's a very handsome sum. And Finance Commission, fortunately, has untied 50%. Of course, we should lobby for untying more, at least in the first 2 years, where panchayats have to have flexibility of spending. So, based on some data, based on some quick situation analysis, the Gram Panchayat Development Plan can be revised. Initially focusing on welfare and services, and moving on to the local economic development, including agriculture and local markets. So you have to front load the GPDP. Normally we do it at the end of the year. Finance Commission gives more money at the last year, but this is a time for front loading, and probably it may be wise to have a national kind of appeal beyond states and politics to the Finance Commission writing all this. So I would use this opportunity to request many of you, if you believe in that, to become a party to a request which can be drafted later on. Then, of course, economic development starts with the supply chain moving. And here, I have faith in the old Gandhian concept of a local market setting things off. You sell to your neighbor, you sell to a slightly distant neighbor, buy from her, and that kind of thing seems to be the only way to trigger local economy. And then, of course, based on different factors in urban opening up, constructions restarting, MSFs opening up, it will take a momentum its own. Otherwise, it may be slow, but it will not put people to starvation. Then using existing schemes. The National Rural Livelihood Mission is fairly flexible. They have a MKSP, Mahila Kisan component. They have a very important component which has not been exploited except in a few states, the so-called micro enterprises using the SHG strength. That requires a lot of effort, a lot of help, but local value, simple value addition, you can start with and move on to higher micro enterprises. So we have a scheme called SVEP, Village Entrepreneurship Program, our city. All this can collectively contribute. Even a clustering is possible. We in Kerala have been dreaming of a SHG moving on to a AMUL pattern. The ownership is with the SHGs, but management of enterprises could be with professionals. That's just a dream. I think that is worth thinking through. Then Professor Abhijit mentioned about the skills. And skills initially cannot be for the urban area. It should be now more to the market. We know the market now. We know where skills are lacking. So that's a slightly later kind of thing, focusing on the unemployed youth, Narega workers' children, plus the migrants, plus whoever has lost employment in their vicinity. So for the post-COVID labor market, you need the skilling. Immediately, skilling will not really help. And last week, again, we had a webinar. Need a diversified Narega. And diversified Narega, of course, a lot of people are demanding that convert agriculture into Narega. I am personally against it. Then you go back to the old, no additional labor will be created, and you can't return to the status quo ante when COVID subsides. That's very dangerous. But in your own farm, in your own cottage industry, in your own legacy industry, and some essential services could be brought under Narega, but that has to be after a great deal of discussion. It can't be announcement and planning. It has to be planning and announcement for that. But probably we can try this. Even it could be for 1 year. It need not be for a long, but to tide over. Because yesterday, a friend's friend was telling through him that their retired professors in US, they got $2,400 in their bank account just early this month. So that is the kind of activity which goes. Then, of course, you are trying to expand agriculture, like things like SRA, agroecological farming and all that. And there is a concept of, which is emerging at one point of time in Narega, the concept of a skilled agricultural labor. It's not a conventional labor who is plucking grass and tilling the soil. They are trained in doing organic agriculture, producing the inputs, spacing, everything. So it's a slight skilling, not a big skilling. The skilled agriculture labor can be of great use in the near future. Now, I've been asked to focus on institutions. So one big thing necessary in India is a formal partnership. It's a partnership between equals, the SHGs and the Gram Panchayats. They have been going parallel all over India, except in Kerala. Now, many states have shown interest, formal interest, and genuine interest that this brings about. Rather grandiosely, sometimes I say, it is political democracy and social democracy coming together. But somehow we need to start. And we need to link SHGs into MGNRHs. Kerala's success of MGNRHs, Kerala absorbs the highest per capita linked to poverty funds in India. Kerala's total expenditure is the same as Bihar. Little shocking. It shouldn't be, I agree. But that is due to the SHGs are managing the MGNRHs. There are 60 lakh SHGs in India, and they can be a real support base for the Gram Panchayat. Then all of you know that Nikhil knows very well, we experimented with something called a cluster facilitation team, which brings some kind of support from volunteers, technical people, civil society to help Panchayat negotiate and prepare a plan, which is absolutely essential. So the worst parts of India can't replicate in all the 2.5 lakh Panchayats. We can do this immediately. This concept, which in Kerala, EMS Namboodiripad came out with voluntary technical corps. Now, in a lot of places, there are colleges, and there is a scheme which is a favorite of the Prime Minister called Unnat Bharat Abhiyan, but it has not taken off, though it was announced in 2014. So, which a local college works with the Panchayat. So, these are the kind of things which we can do immediately. Then, I'm not saying mid-term and long-term, immediately. It's all following sequentially, depending on an organic movement forward, focusing on the micro and then small part of the MSCPs. Now, this 3 lakh crore will remain in 3 lakh crore, or the more well-documented MSCPs will take it unless there is an intermediation. And we found in NRLM this fantastic intermediation by the brand Mitra. So we need to create a slightly more educated or knowledgeable, need not be educated, bank Mitras to really intermediate between banks and the MSCP. Otherwise, the bottom half of the MSMEs will miss this. And then, of course, capacity, hand-holding. And Aruna ma'am suggested maybe in the first year, we can pay 50% or 75% of the wages of MSMEs, selected MSMEs, but directly into the accounts of the workers. So cash support could move into a productive kind of thing. And Kerala tried with an experiment of what is called micro enterprise consultants, highly trained, motivated women. Andhra also, undivided Andhra had that to some extent. So these are the kind of people who can work to help them so that the micro enterprise doesn't collapse and they can see the red signals and really help them. Then my request to all of you, particularly persons like Professor Abhijit Sen, whose voice is respected and heard, we need to bring primary health back on the agenda. It has to be not only India's agenda, now they are saying even in America's agenda. So primary health, we have forgotten. we think everything can be managed by insurance. No, insurance is the last and tertiary thing. So primary health, probably now there will be a political kind of buy-in for primary health care that is linked to the local panchayats. Maybe the sub-centers, the Rogi Kalyan Samitis, the basic nutrition, and so-called determinants of health. And primary health care requires a lot of resources. One act, like US can conscript people for army, India can say that all MBBS graduates shall work for 2 years on full payment, and only then you will get a degree in India. And then it's very easily done. And I don't think anybody will resist. In this is the right mood to bring this in. We need it in the difficult parts of India. That is required. And another plea to you, which was indirectly mentioned by Professor Sen, our larger concept of livelihoods. It's not agriculture and industry and jobs. It is education. It is nutrition. It is health. So these are the foundation for economic activity. And I've read in literature that post disaster, there'll be a huge dropout from schools and more among the poor. This has to be prevented immediately, the next 2 months and all that. And another point, which is again a happy development in these dark times, CSOs are finding their feet and finding a space. So we need some strengthening. Fortunately, Dr. Reddy now handles CAPART. CAPART is part of NIRD. Money need not be given to CSIR, to CSOs, but high quality training. And I saw a training needs assessment. I think it is by Priya, what NGOs need. It's huge. Basically, they need training on information and community handling. They don't need training on technology. So I think that training NIRD can do and probably channel CSR funds to that. I would even favor, this is the right moment, to relook FCRA. I'm not sure whether the government may be interested in that, but that requires now, so that to mobilize, in the interest of mobilizing funds on the lines of the PM cares, probably FCRA with much scrutiny could be amended. And then networking the NGOs. That's interesting. With Vedaria leading RCRC, very interesting. From top NGOs to local NGOs, they are networked for a cause. So those kind of networking is possible. And what I find very positive, many of the NGOs are now interested in panchayats. As Secretary Panchayat Raj, I used to plead with the NGOs. They said, no, they are corrupt, casteist and all that kind of things. We look at livelihoods, we don't look at. Now they are saying there is no livelihood without local governance. It's a big lesson for us. And all these things will not last forever, as I learned from Kerala's face. We get a lot of ideas during the disaster and then quickly forget it and go back to our normal life. So we shouldn't forget it. And then the thing which Kerala has been doing for the last 40 years plus, skilling for overseas employment, not the low-end kind of worker employment, maybe slightly more, especially caregiving will be a huge employment opportunity in the West for a very, very long time to come. So let me conclude. On the institution side, slightly longer term, the farmer producer organizations have not taken off in the way we would have liked. So we have to learn from SHG and from AMUL, so that whether we can bring these lessons together so that FPOs are more lively, farmer SHG, group farming kind of organizations, which graduate to a independent professional organization. Now everything is one. Second, it's something which no government has understood in Delhi, the idea of Pura. Pura is spatial planning for economic development. It's nothing else. Urban is a pale replication of it. We need to reconsider Pura in our heartland for agriculture development, spatial development, for provision of all these services to a concentrated population. Then something, this is the right, I think it will get political traction to revisit the Interstate Migrants Workmen Act of 79, which itself was never implemented, even in a trade union conscious state like Kerala, but it needs. Now, last 20 years, we know a lot about rights. And all these new rights perspectives can be got in. And now there will be, again, as I mentioned earlier, there could be some political traction. The receiving states and the home states are concerned. And for the first time, though migrants have suffered more than anybody else, for the first time, their economic relevance has been understood even by the man in the street. So this is a right to strike when the iron is hot. And local authorities, that's a word used in the Disaster Management Act, and local authorities can be brought into the disaster management planning proper. Flood, drought, which will be more prevalent in India, and of course, these kind of biological. The last point is, right from 1960s, of course, which is nationally borrowed for the building workers, the concept of welfare fund as a social security, very difficult to implement, but welfare fund as a where the employer, the worker, and the government contribute in certain cases is something which we know as an institution of the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for touching upon the very important issues of institutional dynamics of rebuilding rural livelihoods. You touched upon, several issues of on linking Manrega with SHGs for primary healthcare, local panchayats, and then skill development overseas, many more are that, including welfare funds also. So with these words, and now I'll invite Mr. Nikhil Dey, sir, to speak about the, to focus on the perspective of CSOs on reviving and reconstructing of the rural economy. So may I invite Sri Nikhil Dey, sir. And here, here I think, there are around 280 participants who are enjoying this event, and in YouTube there are over 50 participants, so across the country, and there are many questions also which will be asking at the end of this your presentations. So Nikhil, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I missed a little bit just now in between. Can you hear me okay? Just to confirm. Yep. Am I audible?
Yeah, audible, sir.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So, yeah, I would like to firstly say that I'm in very esteemed company. I am neither a professor nor a doctor nor a senior bureaucrat, but I think have a great deal of regard and have spent time with many of the other people, both on the panel and I'm sure amongst the people who have been listening. I think what I would like to say is build actually a little bit on what has been said by the previous speakers, Dr. Reddy, as well as Abhijit ji and Mr. Vijayanand. I think one of the things that we, in these roughly 15 minutes, what I'd like to concentrate on is our own areas of strength. Firstly, I think is to recognize the people who are coming back. A lot of them had completely turned away from agriculture. When in talking to them, and just to give you a kind of a perspective, they had all gone to cities, fed up with agriculture in a sense, or I don't know whether fed up or no hope from it. And we had seen lots of young educated people leaving even government schools and colleges and going and saying there's nothing we want to go back into agriculture to do. It's a very different picture now. They're coming back saying, जो करना है वो गांव में करेंगे. How long that will last, I don't know. But जो करना है गांव में करेंगे और जो जमीन है उसको सुरक्षित रखना है और उससे कुछ काम करना है. So there is a much greater, there's a very big change in perception because they've been so badly treated. And it is clear that this whole economic edifice that we considered necessary for our growth is actually given those workers so little that, and they have been so traumatized by the recent experience that is certainly one opportunity. And whatever else whatever other economic activity happened or didn't, in fact, this was so skin deep that in a period of 8 weeks or 6 weeks, or actually even in the first 4 weeks, your entire capitalist growth enterprise or this production enterprise collapsed. And how long it will take to get back, God only knows. Nobody is able to give those figures and the number of jobs that are lost. But agriculture continued. So despite the fact that we say that there are too many people in agriculture already and that it's not giving enough in terms of returns and there's too much burden on it, and now there'll be an even higher burden on it, nevertheless, that what it gives has at least proved itself to be more stable. And if we did not have the food grain stocks that we had, and if we did not have the agricultural productivity that took place in Rabi just now that we had, and if we did not have people even through the lockdown going to their fields and harvesting and keeping it and securing all that we had, we would have had zero economic activity in this period. So I think let us also give credit to the stability of whatever agriculture is. It isn't great in terms of to the GDP, but the GDP contribution in these last 2 months have shown how important that contribution is and how important it is in thinking things somewhat differently. That's something that I'd like to say at the beginning. Now, I completely agree both with Mr. Vijayan and with actually all the speakers and I'm glad that this conversation is taking place, because rural development is what we are going to have to look for in terms of reconstruction and revival in the next 2-3 months. There will come a time when people maybe will go back where they came from. Hopefully, they will go back to a much better structure and system and scheme of things so that there is a greater degree of security. But for now, we have to see them much, much larger numbers at home. And how can they be productive? How can they be contributing in whatever little way that they can? And how can we get a village and a rural economy going better than what it was, where it was in a situation where people were leaving and saying that they have to find employment elsewhere? Can we not use some form of revival of local economies? Now, our own experience when MGNREGA first began was we saw a sudden burst in the rural economy of certain kinds of districts, of tribal districts, of areas where there was very little activity in the local markets. So it wasn't just that we saw money for the first time in the hands of women or money for the first time in the hands of certain kinds of rural homes that had very little contribution to the economy, but we also saw that money playing a role, having a multiplier effect in those local markets. And that is something, and we saw it during the economic downturn as well that took place in 2009. And we saw that people at that time, actually MGNREGA played a very big role in making sure that those places did not go into a depression. So let's not underestimate that role. I agree with Professor Abhijit Sen about that it would have been great if MGNREGA had actually returned to its demand-based framework, that whoever asks for however much work, money has to be provided. But the fact is, since UPA 2 times, since 2012, 2011, 2012, MGNREGA has been starved of funds. And this 40,000 crores is not insignificant. In fact, in the entire 20 lakh package, it is perhaps one of the only cash stimuluses of some significance, even though it's only 2% of that 20 lakh crores. So in that 40,000 crores, if you looked at it, in the last budget, MGNREGA, we all estimated, needed about 1 lakh crores, what is the current total amount, to be able to run fairly efficiently within the 100-day limit of a normal year. This will at least allow us, if all the state governments respond. Today in Rajasthan, for instance, there are something like 33 lakh people at work. In UP, it has suddenly grown and it is also around 31, 32 lakh. If UP, Bihar and Jharkhand respond and start providing much more work than they were providing earlier, and this is an administrative blockage, it's not a blockage of anything else. If funds with this 1 lakh crores, at least over the next 2 months, we can have a situation where whoever demands work gets work and they get their wages in time. And I think some of these things are extremely important to be able to say that, okay, that family has some income support. Now, with that income support of getting even 100 days at about 200 rupees, the average that was talked about, 20,000 rupees, and if you open it up to every individual and say 40,000 rupees per household, that will make a big, big difference to a local economy. I think beyond the 100 days also, we need to think, we need to make those. Our first step is to make sure that the 100-day MGNREGA works well. But our next step should be able to think with an imagination of what we can do in disaster management terms. There needs to be all kinds of rebuilding that takes place, an assurance of some degree of income security, of course, but also find ways and means of making local enterprises function better. I think this combination with the SHGs, for instance, for a long time we've been saying that since so much of this package is in loans, why can't, whenever there is a, we announce that MGNREGA, if the government were to announce that MGNREGA will not be restricted to 100 days and will not be restricted to just one person per household, but allowed to be an individual entitlement. And we could perhaps, if there is a shortage of cash for a period of time, the SHGs could actually take loans and pay people so that there is no delay in payment. And as the payment comes in from the central government, that loan could be returned to the SHG. Now that would allow people to have a much bigger cash infusion and allow a lot of the local economies. What again Professor Sen said, that there is now in construction activity a very big restriction and much less construction activity. If there is money in every household, and if we make sure that money is of a certain amount, there will be much more local construction that will take place, because that there is a demand for, but there is no cash to be able to encourage that construction. So non-agricultural activity can also benefit. Can we make sure, and this is beyond the 100 days, the 100 days should be protected because it's a tried and tested scheme that should not be tinkered with, that should be actually guaranteed. But beyond the 100 days, can we say that productive activity can also be brought in with the worker deciding where he or she wants to go? Skill development, which is a scheme, I think something called Unnati within the Rural Development Ministry, where they say they give another 100 days to skill development to some of these people who have come back, and can they use their skills as also part of a wage subsidy and also part of a productive activity in the areas? And can, as Mr. Vijay Anand said, can we do caregiving and services as well in the beyond the 100 days, so that we can take care of the problems that COVID has brought out? For instance, can it be used for delivering of rations? Can it be used to make sure none of the elderly go hungry? There is a very big crisis on social security. The elderly, the disabled will not be able to get to banks to even get whatever meager pensions they get. How will we be able to take care of that huge segment of our society? We really need to think about it, because it's a part of our rural society. I think one other aspect that I'd like to talk about that others have not maybe spent so much time on is that when we are talking local government, we have now come to a stage where we have worked out a framework of transparency, participation, and accountability. Now, participation, Kerala has shown us very much in terms of planning, in terms of execution, and there is nothing better for participatory democracy than local self-government. But it needs to be emphasized and brought down to a ward level and brought down to much greater powers given to the panchayat to decide along with their own people, so that every individual gets involved in this business of saying, how do we overcome all the challenges that have come from COVID? But we need to ensure, and we've seen this in Rajasthan, we need, even in this period, we need to ensure that every single disbursement that's made becomes transparent, so that we don't have what we used to have in traditional droughts, that you have disbursements and they go into the pockets of contractors and middlemen, but you make sure that that is money that reaches. Local self-governments are made to be as transparent as possible. You can't maybe have social audits as you had before, but you can certainly have transparency. And at a local level, you can have much greater sense of accountability. We have seen in Rajasthan even now, where there is a need, there are three big needs immediately: food, health, and some form of income security. We have seen in all three things that the government has set up local groups where the block booth level officer, along with the panchayat secretary and the ward member and the sarpanch, are to see at a most decentralized level who is in need and what is to be given to them. Now, if we can have, like Kerala, set up a people's plan, a local economy revival plan, also with in each ward and in each panchayat, and give enough resources to those panchayats, it will be far more effective than trying to fix. And this is not to say to replace what is to be done to revive the economy in cities, but for as long as people are there, their resources and their human resources can be put to a great deal of use. Now, in that, we have seen that they have a grievance redress system in Rajasthan, which was there before, which is telephone based, that anyone can call and say, I have a need for food, I have a need for, I have a health problem. And immediately that local committee is supposed to go and do a visit immediately. Now, that is something that has been made completely transparent. So any of us can check and monitor by seeing who has called and how soon was the response given and what was the response. That also comes in public domain. So if we can mix this local monitoring and transparency along with using technologies that are there, combine both, make them completely transparent, and use those technologies which are able to record every grievance, are able to record every response, are able to record who made that, and make that open to all, you can have a far more effective governance structure, which is not captured also by a local elite, because that is something that is a danger when you have resources coming in and everyone needing resources. There is a very big danger of a vested interest group that will capture whatever resources are coming. And the way to empower these people who are coming back is by actually making far greater transparency, accountability, and participation a reality, make it a non-negotiable during this COVID period. The last thing I'd like to say is that a lot of these things may be seen as experimental. If we were to have something like even for NREGA, for instance, an NREGA 2, which would be a disaster management employment guarantee program, where you allow all kinds of, you remove those restrictions that are there and you allow an employment guarantee to do what it can, which would be not just in rural areas, but even in the small towns that are surrounding rural areas, D-class municipalities like the original Maharashtra Employment Guarantee Scheme had, and say that many state governments can add on to NREGA by having an open-ended employment guarantee program that also covers certain urban areas. I think the relationship between a small village and the small town nearby can really lead to some kind of economic activity at a rural area, rural level, which we've not done for many years, because we've been stuck in this idea that migratory labor is going to go to big cities and is going to produce there, and rural India has no hope of any productivity. So we need to open that up. If the central government doesn't do it, state governments can do it, and have a disaster management employment guarantee program that is an NREGA plus, that allows us to look at both services and the providing of basic services, as well as productive activity, which is small scale cottage industry, things we hadn't been thinking about, but can think about much more now. And perhaps it can also help us revive weaving, do all kinds of skills that were dying away, and make their value, make them valuable, and enhance the livelihoods of people, not just from a wage, but also from what they produce.
Thank you, sir. You have touched really, number of issues, and particularly, I think that the issues of, linking Manrega with the productive activities and skill development, and most important, that extending this, employment guarantee program under the Disaster Management Act, and to taking it to the small towns and cities, also making it a kind of, act and right of work people to demand employment. I think that's a very wonderful point, sir. Now, may I request Professor D.N. Reddy, sir, to speak, sir, on basically, I think a lot of things have been on migration and all the rights and livelihoods issues, sir. So may I invite you, sir, to deliver your talk.
Thank you. I thank Sankaran Chair and ISLE for making me part of this panel, which is, of course, I have benefited a great deal by sitting through the panel. I hope I would get much more inputs. But I think the specific question framed to me is somewhat the one where I have to start with some kind of things that perhaps do not exist when it comes to the question of revival of rural livelihoods. Professor Abhijit Sen was telling that center has done a great deal of programs, centrally sponsored programs. And I'll not use Dr. Vijayanand. He took objection. He has said that we have a great deal of rights, entitlements over a period of time. And Nikhil was talking in terms of the kind of programs which can be modified. And then, of course, effectively through the decentralization, help revival of rural life. But the question that I face is that reimagining of the migrant labor and their rights of life and livelihoods. It's in a sense, if I turn back and say that this is a group where there's hardly anything has been done. There were no programs, no visibility, no registration even, leave alone their rights. Of course, there is a mention of Migrant Labor Act, which perhaps hardly anyone knows what's happening to it. And it's also very truncated kind of an act. Even implementation of this, everybody knows, is very difficult. And the reference to that of building and other construction works to an extent may apply. But the way in which it is being implemented, the registrations, amusingly, there are 14 lakh registrations in a state like Telangana, but they don't have addresses or any such thing, which hardly, the net result was some of that money which lies there has been pushed into the civil supplies department. It's a very strange kind of situation. Well, all that I'm saying is I am with a group which should be understood in terms of the rural-urban continuum. We had, of course, looking back to the situation, I think I have to register like everybody else in the country, for the first time, every citizen of this country knows the kind of suffering that perhaps the migrant labor, particularly temporary, circular, seasonal migrant labor is going through. It's heart-rending, and therefore, do we have answers? Is there anything states have done, and is there anything center has done? And that's where I'm starting. They have not done much, not even recognized that they exist there. It has some kind of a history. I mean, looking back, when it comes to the question of, let's say, the process of development and then movement of labor, there was, I think, we normally start in terms of a Lewisian kind of transition. But there we talk in terms of traditional informal labor moving on to that of modern formal sector, which is, I think, a neat process of transition. But we know the experiences of countries like India, there is hardly any such movement. And therefore, when we refer to that of movement to the urban areas, we had a different kind of an understanding, which is a negative way of understanding this mobility of labor right from early times of planning. If you look at, let's say, 1960s, there was a deliberate negative kind of an attitude to the process of urbanization, and particularly because of this migrant leading to. For instance, it would be amusing, the Planning Commission's Research Program Committee funded a project in 21 cities to see the problem of, let's say, urbanization, particularly from the point of view of the migrant labor. And they thought that was one of the basic reasons for an obstacle for development, because it's likely to lead to that of problems in urban areas. In fact, in 1964, the report came in. And in 1966, there was a study sponsored by, in Gokhale Institute, Savani did it, how to check the migration and how to, let's say, reduce this fast urbanization which is leading to crisis. And as things went on, they started blaming everything on this migration. And then there was a time when they were talking in terms of migration is leading to that of urbanization of rural poverty. But this process, I mean, that early stages, maybe there was some kind of a distress migration. But as things go on, as if, of course, Nikhil was trying to suggest the nature of those who are moving in, they're not the ones who are thrown out because they are not willing to work in agriculture, but they developed certain skills, capabilities which don't fit in. And at the same time, the demand's growing in. And this is the context where we're talking in terms of these resources, if it were to be used properly, and then, of course, provided properly, could have been seen as a major kind of a resource for improving productivity and right kind of, let's say, urbanization. But on the contrary, this negative attitude continued, not until the 2002. And that too, of course, there was a report in the UN, which I think shared that most of the Asian countries have this negative attitude. And the 10th Five-Year Plan for the first time started talking about the positive contribution that urbanization could make to that of development, and of course the contribution that migrant labor have to do in the process of urbanization. But when it comes to the question of detail, although they were saying that India was slow in urbanization, by the time 11th plan came, the whole thing was turned upside down. This exactly, you just cannot forget what is being done to that of migrant labor now without referring to that, the kind of shift in policy. You start looking at this labor as some kind of a burden, and then this is the process of increasing informalization. And in fact, when it comes to the question of this labor, it is seen as some kind of, let's say, activity which has to be controlled. I mean, this control is, if I have to quote some kind of, let's say, that the policy framework for urbanization and migrant labor, it talks in terms of, let's say, some kind of a regulation of this labor. That means the movements, but not without regulation means their location. There are cases taken to that of, let's say, those who are, let's say, on without shelters, and those who are, let's say, daily kind of, let's say, pushcart workers. Courts have started coming in along with the governments trying to say that vacate them and report. This is the kind of an attitude, completely negative attitude, which turned into that some kind of a hostile attitude. You see, it's a parallelly, if you look at, let's say, the kind of work done on urbanization and the problem of migrant labor, there is a series of studies on, let's say, what is happening, that they are no longer, as Nikhil said, even by the 2002, they're not distressed migrants. They're bringing in skills. They're trying to, let's say, work. And then there is an expansion of informality. They're all being in the informal sector. But when it comes to the question of there is no registration, no portable identity, no access to that of anything like public amenities, like public health, and there, I think they suffered. This substantial part of what you are talking in terms of, on the one hand, rapid growth, substantially concentrated in these areas. Even now, very interestingly, we say that about 10 cities account for, let's say, substantial proportion of this output in the country, and also the kind of, let's say, suffering that's going on in the name of even COVID kind of infections. That's also the location of these people. But luckily, of course, it's not infecting them as much, fortunately. And the kind of, there was no account of their kind of a dual livelihoods. And some of them have some, even those who have skills, a painter, a repairman, an AC worker, a driver, they have some piece of land. They used to do some kind of in-season move on to that of rural areas, earn something, and come back for substantial earning. And as Professor Abhijit was trying to say, it's very difficult to estimate because we have very interesting estimates of international migration and their remittances and the contribution made to that of economy. For instance, we say Kerala's economy, external migrant remittances contribute almost 30% of the GDP, but no account. And that's where I depend upon Professor Abhijit. He's saying it could be about 10%. And who are these people? And if you look closely, of course, there is a kind of a detailed analysis of this kind of circular migrants. They're all the bottom of the society substantially, even though some of them have education. It's not the top player. Top player goes there even to urban areas to invest, accumulate, both in rural areas through land, and then of course in urban areas with commerce. Both ends they benefit. But substantial portion of this migrant labor go without, let's say, their livelihoods are a kind of, no, it's not necessarily a kind of, let's say, what we refer to a moral premises on which I am talking in terms of, it's a real kind of a neglect. And then they had stretched kind of livelihoods. I mean, in fact, they're stretched kind of life worlds with families, two places. And that's, I think, another reason why they desperately want to go back. Even on the 60th day, there are millions of people. And therefore, this neglect has led to that of a substantial kind of, let's say, suffering, which is largely because of, let's say, this negative and hostile attitude. Even when they started recognizing its positive contribution, that doesn't seem to have come anything in support of them. It's exactly, there are a number of instances. In fact, the report of the National Urban Poverty Report by Hashim Committee, which talks in terms of, categorically, it turns to that of the kind of, let's say, contribution that made. It talks in terms of, it concludes that all such claims that poor migrant labor flocking to the city and adding to that of the poverty in urban areas was totally unfounded. And urban poverty is not due to that of push factor. And also there is evidence that those migrants, except those in some kind of a semi-bandage, are not the poorest who can move to urban areas. They are the ones who have some skills or some resources to go there to make their lives improve. And in fact, he was cautioning, and that was, of course, last time, he was talking in terms of they face extensively what we see now as three major vulnerabilities of residential, occupational, and of course, the health kind of vulnerabilities. And there is none of these reports, kind of, let's say, studies have not been cared to look at. Therefore, the result is there are a number of studies which are also trying to give a framework as to how to frame an urban policy. It may be by taking into this kind of a labor who is in the rural-urban continuum. And in fact, this is, I think this is unfortunate. Our title itself talks in terms of the present crisis, opportunities, challenges, and then way forward. You don't have to wait for the kind of, let's say, crisis that we are facing for thinking in terms of this is an opportunity. No, it's a total kind of a crime to neglect this dimension of human suffering, which was waiting there in spite of the knowledge available, which was not used. And therefore, I think we can come back and then think in terms of how do you reimagine it? And then reimagine them as citizens with the kind of constitutional rights, reimagine them as workers with their rights, give them the basic kind of rights. And you have a policy, a design of, let's say, a policy framework, which is zero now. You could think in terms of, let's say, both promotional, provide them the kind of facilities that perhaps any decent kind of a human being requires in urban areas to work, live, earn, at the minimum to that extent. And of course, the health, and then, of course, education of the children. And then you also talk in terms of protective thing. This is, I think, one of the landmarks was as a part of the informal sector, because this impact of neoliberal kind of an onslaught on the economy and the neglect and the indiscriminate concentration of the entire regional development policy is given up. And if you look at, for instance, so-called, if you map the so-called special economic zones, they're all concentrated like terribly around, let's say, cities. There is huge possibilities of moving them. And these programs also have become land grabbing programs. And many a time, the victims are, let's say, those who are working there, earning their livelihood, are being pushed out of the peripheries without, and let's say, facilities of whatever perhaps require amenity, live alone amenities. And therefore, there's a huge opportunity. I pick up, let's say, one important thing that Nikhil touched upon. We have a interesting kind of urbanization in India. Unlike other countries where urbanization is through that of agglomeration in big cities, ours, if you look at from 2001, the process of increase in urbanization is driven by small towns, including that of, let's say, census towns. And the rate of growth of population in urban areas is substantially more in small towns rather than that of rich. Actually, there has been slowing down of, let's say, the concentration of urban areas, big metropolitan areas. And then there is a network of these small towns. And there is a huge possibility for rethinking on linking them. And look at also SMEs, they are shifting. In fact, everybody has these SMEs. Of the 6.3 crore SMEs, half of them, or not half, actually 58% of them are in rural areas. There is hardly anything that you could do with small businesses being concentrated within the cities. And there is, let's say, already something like 52% of employment, I'm talking in terms of non-agricultural SMEs, in rural areas of the total. These are potentials. We can work out on them, provide them that skills in the sense, the first thing is where to come back, and then we are talking in terms of skills in the air. Unless you provide them good foundational education, the way in which skill requirements are changing are very fast. You can't become a taxi driver by just learning how to drive, but you must be in a position to use your, let's say, software in your, let's say, smartphone. This kind of, it keeps changing. And then some of these skills come from at least 10th class. Have we guaranteed the kind of education in rural areas which perhaps prepares them for this kind of skills? And or is there an opportunity for them to go and get this? It's possible with a network of small towns. We have not talked in terms of in the process of migration, commuting. In fact, we have studies which show that, of course, Kerala's geography is different, that you can stay in a rural area and then work in nearby towns. We have huge small towns. They're brimming with that of, let's say, the possibility as a potential sources for building up around them. None of these things are thought about. You have not thought about the migrant labor as people with what we have said, that over a period there has been more rights, but they don't get that. And on the other hand, the kind of things that are happening in the name of, let's say, labor reforms, it would be disastrous. Therefore, if we have to reimagine, there is a huge potential to reimagine in our own conditions of rural-urban kind of networks, and our own urge in rural areas also for kind of quality education. And then it could be done, as of course he's talking about, Vijayanand was talking about Pura. Yes, it's people go to at very heavy human cost for education of children. Sometimes some kind of health. The Pura, the so-called, let's say, structural kind of linking of the small towns with that of facilities like better schools can retain them to an extent. And then there would be a better kind of, let's say, migrant labor and a better productivity of, let's say, the whole of the economy, both rural and urban. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Reddy. I think, the big toughest question, that reimagining of that, migration and their rights and all that. So I think you have nicely put out that, that we have to reimagine their migrants as a citizen, as a right of their work, as a right of their, health, and one of the important, I think, as a kind of right of their life and dignity. And then you talked about how this the challenge of rural employment can be tackled by promoting small and small towns, and then linking their towns with the rural development. And there is some program called Urban program, I think, and then how it can be done. There's a kind that is a kind of, I think, big potential for generating what do you call that stable employment opportunities. So thank you very much, sir. Now there are number of questions, because still people around 260 people are watching you and around 15 YouTube. And there are, I think more than 62, 63 questions have been addressed to different participants. So DG sir, can we now go for some question answer, sir?
Yes, please. Just before that, I want to make add one more point, taking the cue from the panelists. The approach, I think, what Dr. D.N. Reddy has rightly put it, the approach should be area-based on a cluster approach of panchayats being in the center of action, and weaving all the other players, all other departments, undertaking the natural resources, the local resources, and then identifying the feasible SME activities, and then put in the skilling, what type of skilling is required. Not first you create the skilling, train the people in some XYZ, and then they go here and there, and then some of them drop out. Instead of that, area-based on a cluster basis, planning, taking the local resources into account, and then plan an SME or cluster of SMEs, and then skill the local youth, and then put them into the activities. And this approach would require huge professional manpower, professional support. The existing professional support or professional competency at either Gram Panchayat or cluster, either mandal or block level, is not enough. So huge professional competencies are to be infused. And I think infusing that professional competency should be a major intervention which we should be thinking about. So over to you, Mr. Rajendra, Dr. Rajendra.
Thank you, sir. I think, what I'll, with the permission of chair, what I will go for, I'll pick up, 2 questions for each learned speaker. And because there are variety of questions, and it's difficult to, I think, answer each and every one, but, that's my liberty to pick two very prominent important questions, which they have been, appearing in our question and answer box, So there is 2 questions for Professor Sen, sir. One is that, despite, declining potential of agriculture in providing rural jobs and livelihoods, how do you think that, this sector can prosper, through it strengthening infrastructure and through doing away with the kind of, infrastructure?
Sorry, I can't.
Sir, there's one. Should I repeat, sir? So one question is that, because agriculture as a source of, employment and livelihood, its role is gradually declining. How can we think about that, that there are, how the employment opportunity outside agriculture can be created in rural area? That's one question. The second question, which I've been, asked also, that whether the time has come that we should go for the universal basic income. So these are 2 questions, which have been, along with many questions have come up. So, sir, I'll request, that just to do it within 5-7 minutes, sir.
Okay, let me take the second one first. Universal basic income as an idea, my normal answer to that would be that there are cases, for example, pensions of various kinds to the old age, to the destitute, to even widows, is a very good idea. So are scholarships, universal scholarships to the young. But I don't see normally much great merit in universal income benefit to the working able-bodied. I think that I have some reservations against normally. But I think in the present situation, a certain amount of cash transfer, since the wage side has completely stopped, at least especially amongst the migrants, does merit at least temporary, it makes sense, which is why I support the idea of, say, a certain amount of transfer, say on PM Kisan lines, but not limited to a particular group of people as in the PM Kisan. But that's my view on universal cash transfers. Coming back to the agriculture, non-agriculture divide and the way in which that should play out, I think DN Reddy was very, very good on what has been the past assumptions on this matter. And to put it very simply, it has been in the past that will take place. We need to make it orderly. And then we allowed it to take place because it was happening in any case, without making provisions for the form it was taking or the problems it was leading to. At the root of all of this lies, of course, the fact that for some reason or the other, although even within rural areas, non-farm employment and income sources were going up, we still were looking in terms of industrial policy or the economic policy at large in terms of a geographical growth, which either by plan on design or accidentally was getting concentrated in terms of incomes, at least largely in and around a few big city locations. Although manufacturing was spreading to other places, the service sector was getting very, very concentrated. And I think what we need to do is to work on an idea that several panelists have suggested, which is there is an organic link between the small town and the countryside around those small towns. Which small town serves as the hub? Which parts of the countryside can, in fact, graduate from a census town to a proper town are matters, I think, which should be left to their organic way in which it grows. But as a policy issue at the moment, I think it's very important to break down to some extent, as Nikhil particularly mentioned, that Narega stops where rural departments work stops. I think one should allow a certain degree of spillover to what are otherwise defined as urban areas in order to build linkages, because after all, you will require certain types of spatial agglomeration to get things going. And I see that possibility quite large, in fact, at the moment, as people who have the skills to work in urban areas are already back or are in the process of getting back into rural areas. And with some attention from the government and some interest, if the government itself shows the proper incentives from the private sector, I think not everywhere, but in substantial parts of the country, I think there is a fair amount of possibility. But let me reiterate a point I'd said earlier. You can't do that sort of major rethink of your urban-rural links or the design of your development geography with loans alone. You have to think about a large fiscal intervention. And in this case, I think that fiscal intervention is not only worth it, it's probably got no other alternative. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sen. Now there is another one set of questions for Bijan sir. This is question, basically, and I could not neglect it. It has been raised by Professor Dinesh Awasthi. He was director of EDI, the Entrepreneur Development Institute of India. So he has two questions for you, sir, and there are related questions to by others also. So one is that how the middleman problem in agriculture marketing can be reduced. That is one thing. And the other thing is that, how this Manrega money for skill development can be used, because there will be some lot of, I think, some changes would be required, constitutional changes, whether the constitutional changes are required. So these are two questions for you, sir. You have to unmute it, sir.
Yeah. Okay. I think I suggested the answer. Now we have huge SHG experience, not just village cooperatives, in working together for livelihoods. And we have the old AMUL experience in professional management. So if your FPOs can be structured, learning lessons, I can only put it very conceptually, from the SHG and your dairy cooperatives, probably the middleman problem can be sorted to a large extent, except where people get into contract farming and those kind of things. For the ordinary small and marginal farmer, this could be a way out. Second, MGNRGS cannot directly be used for skills. That shouldn't be. But MGNRGS is a self-targeted group of the poor, automatic targeting of the poor. So their next generation, their children, their younger people can be skilled under the different skills program. Even MGNRGS workers, for example, are young and they can be developed into construction workers, quality construction workers, kind of masons and plumbers and all that. It's very easy. It's a very short jump. Then those who can't have the skills is what I mentioned as skilled agriculture labor. And India came out with a great skills policy, skills qualification framework. So all this, if you apply, probably skilling can be more formal and more in tune with the needs of the urban area. I just wanted to mention one more small thing. The human resource for Gram Panchayats is very weak now. But we calculated that all these federally sponsored schemes together have about 4 or 5% for administrative costs, which will come to more than 5,000 crores a year. And the 14th Finance Commission, 10% is allowed. So together we have 10,000 crore a year, most of which can be used for creating this stuff. Then response to what Professor Abhijit said, the organic link between small town and rural areas, there is a constitutional machinery for bringing this about. Unfortunately, that is forgotten, the district planning committee. So it's a constitutional institution which is totally non-functional. Probably we need to think of it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think there is another set of questions for Nikhil Day, sir. Sir, there are two questions for you. I just picked it up. One is that, there is a pending wage bill of under Manrega of about 11.5 lakh crore rupees, and how this new allocation is going to make a sense. That is one question. The other question is that, what kind of skill development challenges at the village level you are looking, you are visualizing or you are experiencing. So these are two questions for you, sir.
So the first question, that doesn't seem to me an accurate figure. there is a pending, there's no pending wages as far as I know. There are some pending material liabilities. There were about 17,000 crores, 16,500 crores pending from last year's both labor and material, which were paid out of this year's budget. So actually from the 1 lakh crores that is now there, there will be about 84,000 crores for expenditure available this year. That's my understanding roughly. And yeah, that 84,000 crores, as many of the speakers have pointed out, will not be enough. It will need further enhancement, but at least it is there now to be able to run a credible program. So it is now up to the state governments to run a credible program, and that is there within the 100 days and within 100 days per household framework. That itself is a challenge because many states have not done that. They don't have good shelf of works. This needs to be seen as a kind of an emergency situation in which they provide work on demand and show how it can be done. And then all of us need to put pressure to get more money in so that it really runs like a demand program. The kinds of skills that, so again, what Mr. Vijayanand said, it is true that Narega, you have to do the 100 days under Narega, but there is, as far as I know, there is a program called, I think it's called Unnati, where after 100 days, those who have completed 100 days work, they can be skilled in something, and from those same houses, either those workers themselves or someone from the house can get skill development and can get put into that and can get paid minimum wages, can be Narega wages for another roughly 90 days. So that is a very interesting model by which we can combine that even with a kind of a wage subsidy, because many of these people who are coming back actually have some degree of skills. And if we can combine their work, because then we are not restricted of where they will do that work, that skill development can be done even on the job, and it can be done in those peri-urban towns around. And we can run a massive skill development come wage subsidy program for between the villages and the peri-urban areas. And that would be very useful. And we should again do it as a guarantee. Those who have completed 100 days, more work that they want, they can choose between work and skill development. And we put money into skill development, and that skill development should be properly, there is a lot of scam in skill development as well. We need to be careful about that. And we need to make sure that people who are going into skill development don't go in just to get a wage. They should go in, I mean, it should be combined with a credible institution that will give skills on the job. And as Mr. Reddy had said earlier, what skills are necessary in which areas, those should be mapped. And it can be done. This kind of planning can be done. So I don't want to name the particular skills because they will vary from place to place. I want to say that we need to take advantage of the people who are coming back who have a certain degree of skill. And we need to be able to contribute to the economy in that area. And actually we should be able to use their skills. And something that we need to look at in a more imaginative way, you know, so there has been an article, for instance, by Professor Prabhat Patnaik and Harsh and Jayati Ghosh, which talked about what kind of revival plan will be needed. I want to also make a reference to when the United States had its Great Depression, they built this New Deal where the center point of that New Deal was that people will get public work and will get work and employment in whatever skill they have. So what amazed us when we went around and saw actually Roosevelt's New Deal and what they had done was that how many people, those who were painters, painted, those who could contribute in terms of being able to teach, taught at a minimum wage level. Maybe many of these workers who come in will not be able to earn as much, but at least they can contribute to the local economy by getting a Narega type wage. If we try and think about how best we can innovatively do Narega employment guarantee, disaster employment guarantee program. So we can develop skills, we can use skills. There are existing skills we can use, and we must be able to see a skill development program, not just as some training program, but as something that really connects you with something, an economic activity that's needed and where you can learn on the job, because that's something that we can combine at this time.
Just to add, Mr. Rajendra, what Mr. Nikhil has said, the wage component, of course, there is no overdue. The material cost, whatever that was outstanding during the previous financial year, has been cleared. I was talking to the concerned Joint Secretary MG Narega of RD Ministry 2 weeks back. So he was very happy in telling that we have cleared all the pending dues, including the materials, and provided enough advance amount for about 2 months requirement based on the previous year's work pattern. That can be sufficient for the MG Narega works to be taken up. That's number one. Number two, regarding Unnati, of course, is in the initial phases to start with. As Mr. Nikhil has mentioned, it has to be properly planned and it has to be innovative. I was wondering, of course, post-COVID situation, presuming that some of the workers will come back, and their skilling upgradation is also a requirement of the day. So if the family is MG Narega card holder or provide a new card, can we arrange such skilling in the same activity in which he is working? Let's say a plumber for better plumbing skills, mason, better mason skills under Unnati. I think the informal labor market we see in the labor addas in most of the cities, they come and some of them will get the job, some of them will go back. If you can capture that labor adda, recently we have done a study of labor adda situation in Hyderabad, which we will be bringing out that study soon. I think creating a skilling platform for these workers, even in the urban, semi-urban areas, towns, also would be a good idea as part of the Unnati. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now, there are again two questions, for Professor D.N. Reddy. Sir, one is that, it has been asked by Professor Amita Shah. She has been the director of Gujarat Institute of Development Research. She is asking question, what happens to industries and other urban services as migrants may not, return to the cities? So what will be the urban situation of such kind of services which migrants are providing in urban areas? What will happen to the such services in urban areas? Second thing is that's, I don't think that is directly related, but it is on, what is the kind of, opportunities for, opportunity you see for migrant workers in forestry and fisheries, because these are the two sectors, promising sectors for employment generation. So what kind of, scenery you visualize for migrant workers in these two industry subgroups? Sir, over to you. Professor Reddy, you have to unmute. You have to unmute, sir.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Now, for those who had certain basic skills where they're earning relatively higher income, I think the kind of informal telephonic interviews that are being conducted by several centers, and Nikhil was also mentioning about it, most of them are there temporarily. You see, the kind of a crisis that we are seeing is not merely an economic crisis, it's a human crisis. Not under normal circumstances, they would have spent 10 months or 1 year in a place of their destination working, and most of them, substantial part of their earning, they send home to rural areas, and they go back home to spend with families for 2-3 months. And in fact, the season that they go back invariably in most of the cases is that of, let's say, the monsoon season, where they themselves there is no possibility of construction work, or there are some areas where urban work also gets stopped. But there are areas where there is a regular kind of employment, there are skilled labor employed, who are also seasonally used to go back home to rural areas. The question is, if they don't come back, what happens? There is no way that they will not come back permanently. This is exactly, we don't have to worry if they don't come back, in the sense that you can take care of them whatever way you like at the rural areas. That's a different strategy. But our major question of urban migrant crisis is that you have not looked at them as the kind of people with rights, capabilities, and therefore they are bound to come back. And therefore we are saying have a design of a policy to help them in future. It should not get repeated. That's the question. Therefore, temporarily, revival of the work, revival of the economy will take time. And it's not going to be somebody talking about V-shaped model. I don't think it would be stupid to think in terms of present conditions, some kind of a jump start. It will revive, and therefore they spend some time with their families. Most of the interviews that are made of the skilled labor, they are saying that we want to spend some time and go back. They will come back. They're not abandoning. But when they go back, learn lessons, bring in a comprehensive policy that helps them not to suffer the kind of suffering that they are going through. It's inhuman to continue that in spite of making whatever our scholars had in studies invisible. They have made it visible to everyone. The whole world is watching. Change your policy, intervene, invest. It has to be state which does it. You can't think in terms of winding up labor laws and ensuring them better life. That's it. And there is a second question also, no? Opportunities of, yeah, this is very interesting. For instance, somebody even before this session started was asking me, do you have fishermen in your view?
Dr. T.
In terms of rural.
Dr. T. Hut, sir.
Okay. So, see, in fact, it's a strange situation. There are two types of fisheries. One is marine, and traditionally, most of the fishers are in the marine fisheries. And there has been, for various reasons, decline in marine fisheries and increasing. For instance, if you look at the Andhra coast, and of course it may be same for Kerala coast, there are huge kind of, let's say, inland fisheries commercially done. And in fact, if you look at the district income of a district like Nellore or West Godavari, it's almost, let's say, 12 to 13% of the district income is from inland fisheries. It is done by very high investments, by commercial investments. They're all oriented to exports. But what is happening to fishers? In fact, Andhra fishers are supposed to be migrating in large scale. There is nothing like marine fishermen, interestingly, with a long coast in Odisha. All the marine fishermen in Odisha coast are Andhra fishermen. All the fishermen now in Gujarat, substantial portion of their migrant Andhra fishermen. So it's migrant labor is also very closely stuck with that of fishermen. And they're also the ones who are caught. And then once, of course, there is no work, they're not able to even come out. In fact, they're also branching out to that of in West Coast. There's some wages are better, they're ship breaking. The same fishermen, they're also working in those activities. They lose that. Therefore, there's a big crisis for some of these activities. They can't do any other work. They can't do any agriculture work. They can't do any other work. That's why they go all the way to that of Gujarat to work or Orissa to work. And it has to be, and there is some kind of a, I don't know, of all the long list of interventions, there is a mention of fishers also, but what happens, I don't know.
Thank you, sir. Now, may I invite Dr. P.P. Sahu. He is one of the co-coordinator of the seminar, webinar, to reflect some, I think we don't have time, but some few takeaway points from this meeting, and then a formal vote of thanks to all our distinguished participants and learned scholars. Professor Dr. Sahu.
Thank you, Professor Memgen. I think Professor Memgen has already summed up after every speaker has spoken, so I don't take time to sum up, but I would like to say a couple of points. One, the message is clear that we are passing through a difficult time and more tougher time is ahead so far as rural India is concerned. So, and I would like to quote what Professor Prabhat Patnaik and others have recently written, that 5 fundamental rights will be very important to rebuild the Indian economy and especially the rural India. Right to food, right to employment, right to free public healthcare services, right to free education, and right to a living old age pension and for disability. So having said this, I like to express deep sense of gratitude and vote of thanks to all eminent panelists. It is a rare occasion to listen to such prolific speaker at such a time at one point of time. And the whole deliberation was very engaging, thought-provoking, illuminating, and engaging. And I am sure it will give us a sense of direction and a lot of food for thought and action. And we'd like to take this dialogue forward. In coming days, NIRD will organize a series of lectures and webinars, and I look forward to continued support from all of you. And I would like to thank the ISD team and ISLE team, Professor Alak Sharma and Ms. Priyanka Tyagi, for the smooth conduct of this webinar. And we could team up and attract a huge crowd for this webinar. And I am thankful to our DG, Dr. Reddy, for excellent support and strong encouragement all through. And I would like to place in record and thank all the participants who today not only joined in the webinar, but also watch the live telecast on the YouTube. And we would like to solicit their continued support for our quest for knowledge, wisdom, and of course, action. So thank you very much. And back to Professor Mamgen.
Thank you, Dr. Sahu. Dr. Priyanka, I would request you to make, so because Priyanka is one of our, very team member providing all excellent support support. She's a documentation officer in Institute for Human Development, and she has been giving me a lot of support during these days in conducting this seminar along with the other team. So Priyanka, any announcement from your side?
Yes, I would just like to say thank you. It was a very engaging session. And thank you to all the resource persons here. It has been so informative. And it was wonderful teaming up with you, Professor Mamgen, with NIRD, ISLE. I'm at the moment representing ISLE. I handle communications for that. So thank you very much. I hope everything went smooth. I have close to 300 people joined us on here, and 30-40 people joined us at YouTube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to compile all the questions that we've received, all the chats that we have received, and people have shared their views with you, Professor Mamgen, and also I will share the YouTube link which you can circulate among the participants. Many participants are asking for participation certificates, and these days this is the way to attend seminars and gain their API scores. I hope we'll be able to furnish that as well from NIRD. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure organizing this session. Thank you to all the panelists, moderator, and you, Professor Mamgen and Dr. Sahu. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Priyanka. Thank you very much to all of you, sir. And we look forward for your valuable cooperation. Thank you all to dear participants, very senior participants also. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.